It's like I said before, regarding the threat of Al-Qaeda against the mainland United States. Just 3 days ago, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report. And as you can see, it says here, the NCTC, which is the National Counterterrorism Center, supports U.S. law enforcement first responders by sharing intel product aimed at deterring attacks by Al-Qaeda. And this is the press release, released September 19, 2025. NCTC supports U.S. law enforcement first responders about the threat of Al-Qaeda. Now, it says here, let's read along. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI, National Counterterrorism Center, the NCTC, recently disseminated an unclassified intelligence product, which we're going to show later, to law enforcement partners aimed at protecting America against the threat of Al-Qaeda left over by the Biden administration. The threat of Al-Qaeda wasn't just left over by the Biden administration. It was left over by previous administrations. It was allowed to exist. After the 9/11 attacks, under the Bush Jr. administration, we had a chance to kill bin Laden and the rest of the Taliban, and we didn't get the necessary support to the CIA Special Activities Division in Operation Jawbreaker, which was led by Gary Bernstein. I talked about this yesterday in the Tucker Carlson video. We allowed for bin Laden to escape to Pakistan. Another group went to Iran under house arrest. And from there, after, over the years, Al-Qaeda continued to regroup. And what they did was Al-Qaeda grew in the Sahel, or in the Arabian Peninsula. And what this happened was, over the years, these groups it took a couple of years to gain back the influence that they once had. After the death of bin Laden, Al-Qaeda went underground. And they went underground under the tutelage of the Taliban. The Taliban then took over the country of Afghanistan in 2021 when the Biden administration pulled out of its 20-year war. And what happened? In weeks, the Taliban took over the country because the United States was really handcuffed and not given the support by either the Department of Defense or the State Department to basically just eradicate the entire organization. The New York Times even came out and spoke with former generals, former lieutenant generals about, and policy analysts about the failure between the departments and the Army and the Marines and the Special Forces regarding false intelligence, faulty intelligence, third-hand intelligence, and not getting the proper funding to defeat the Taliban, which, by the way, would take a long time because the terrain is unknown to the Americans and to the coalition partners who basically weren't getting the full support, which, I mean, this is, touching on conspiracy, but I believe that the State Department either is just this inept, or they allowed for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to exist because later on down the road, we could use them as, a force to overthrow socialist governments. And then later on, they could become the threat that we once almost eliminated because this keeps the war machine reciprocating. You can't tell me that long-term foreign policy analysts don't see this. They think 10, 20 years down the road. And it would be hard-pressed for me to sit here and tell you that everybody within the foreign policy analyst team or the U.S. Policymakers team or the foreign policy analysts or the Department of Defense or the principals meetings, which is the leaders of the FBI, the DCI, and the CIA and the DIA, they just can't come up with a sound plan to defeat the Taliban. I'm sorry. We can't. We almost did. Under President Trump's leadership, the NCTC is working across agencies to watch list, screen, vet, and press information to combat all threats to the American people and best protect the safety, security, and freedom of the nation. Look, I'm not going to read this whole thing because I want to get to the next document, which talks specifically about the threats to the American homeland. I'm going to tell you right now, after the 9/11 attacks, and we bombed Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Pakistan. This created, and of course with the Israelis and their bombing campaigns of Gaza over the years and West Bank, mainly Gaza, this created an influx of immigration, not to just Europe, but to the United States. And because of our porous border policy, which is fucking porous, not just the southern border, but the northern border. And this is where, it begins, a lot of people don't talk about the northern border. And this is where we have a large influx of Arab communities in southern Canada, such as Vancouver, British Columbia, right on the border of the United States. They have large communities. Now, these are not terrorist communities, but you don't know who's moving in next door to you. But I can tell you right now, if I am a living male and I'm 19 and you just killed my family and you destroyed my livestock and it was through the West, I'm going to basically join a terrorist group from within to compromise and conduct terrorist attacks inside your country. Look, I know that there are experts much more thorough than me. I'm a novice in this. But, even I can see that with our porous border in the north and south, with our reprehensible, immoral foreign policy that's tied into Israel and Saudi Arabia, we are creating these terrorists. Now, I'm not saying we're creating them out of thin air, but we're giving these people no option other than to react. The action is in the reaction. Remember that. Okay? That's what this is about. All right? Now let's talk about the document. This is it. This is the spotlight. This is the Joint Counterterrorism Assessment. This was given to the Office of National Intelligence. Al-Qaeda's recent calls to conduct attacks in the United States highlights its enduring threat to public safety. Remember what I said in previous videos, especially in my Darkest Thoughts video series, where I give my opinions instead of just, being bland in other videos where I talk about just the information, the facts. I'm a little bit more open in those videos where I think I can, opine about from my experiences in studying counterterrorism and terrorism about how I think Al-Qaeda will conduct attacks inside the United States. They won't use planes this time, or they might use planes and conduct urban warfare. I happen to really believe that the threat will be deception, that they'll be dressed as either National Guardsmen or policemen or military officers in big cities and conduct attacks in busy streets. This will paralyze, like I said, the nation. Especially imagine if you have 4 to 5 unit teams in, say, 15, 20 cities. How many people can you kill? And not just to mention, this will mimic the Lambarks plot, which was hatched by El Said Nosser, an Egyptian militant tied with older socialist organizations, one being a Salafist organization, Takfiri organization called Gamma Islamiyah under the Blind Sheikh, and also ties with the ANO. What did the ANO conduct? Urban terrorism. And I think this is what Al-Qaeda is going to go back to. All right, so here's the scope. This product is intended to inform federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial government, law enforcement, and first responders of an Al-Qaeda recent call to attack against the United States. What will be the motivation? The motivation is Gaza and how we previously had destroyed Syria, Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda's resurgence of calls for attacks in the homeland highlights its persistent and enduring threat to the country, U.S. officials, and public safety. Al-Qaeda and its Yemen-based affiliate, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the only affiliates that have successfully enabled an attack in the homeland, are likely seeking to leverage their media publications to As-Sahab, that's Al-Qaeda's media arm, and global conflicts, particularly where there is U.S. support or military involvement to inspire potential attackers. right? Like I said, it's not going to be hard. Let me blow this up just a little bit more for you to read so you can see, right? In mid-July of 2025, Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula released its 10th edition of Inspired Guide, the second issue within a month, celebrating recent attacks in the United States and calling on supporters in the homeland to conduct attacks using simple attack methods such as firearms, explosive knives, vehicle rammings, or Molotov cocktails, right? In June, Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula leader Saad Atif al-Awlaki released a video inciting the believers. I played this, a little bit of it, in previous videos, calling for attacks against U.S. President, the Vice President, Secretary of Defense. Okay? Now, I want to go down here because it talks about specific attacks and threats to the nation in the years after 9/11. As you can see, symbolic economic attacks, aviation, symbolic economic targets, right? U.S. military government targets. I'm going to leave a link for this down below, okay? But what I want to talk about is basically the first responder perspective. Now, in terms of aviation, violent extremists have sought to attack aviation targets due to their symbolic and economic value and media attention. Public safety responsible for responding to confined spaces on aircraft may consider having access to function specialized equipment such as personnel protective equipment. Additionally, hoax threats like swatting may be used as a low-cost, low-risk tactic to instill fear, disrupt operations, and resources. Potential mitigation measures include assess for inconsistent noises in the background or the caller's demeanor, review the threat for vagueness, inconsistency, or implausibility, or confirm the call was made through voice over services. This is how you can determine whether this is a true threat or an actual threat. That's why this document is very important. Symbolic economic targets. Violent extremists often seek an attack on or conduct online messaging campaigns against targets that draw large crowds, incite fear, praise from FTO supporters, and threaten economic interests. Now, regardless of the event size, venue, or location, event planners and public safety can think at some of the following factors when preparing for special events in other words, sporting events, concerts, right? Security. Integrate a visible law enforcement presence using roving interagency law enforcement teams to identify possible threats, including, now listen, this would mean that those in large stadiums, such as college football stadiums or baseball stadiums or concerts, don't hire allied security. Hire a specific security team that is experienced in terrorism. How to spot a suspicious individual with, say, a large coat. And this is the reason why I'm saying that, if the threat is going to be dressed as somebody working in the military or as a police officer, you won't necessarily know. This is what I mean when I played that video regarding deception. Saif al-Adil, the unofficial emir of Al-Qaeda, wrote a book about how to attack the enemy. And in one chapter, he talked about deception and how to employ deception in gaining the enemy's trust or to confuse them and then take advantage when they are not at the ready. Information sharing. Conduct pre-event briefings to share new information about safety and security of medical plans, policies, and procedures. Do we have everybody on the same page regarding how to spot threats? Do we have the technical capabilities to keep everybody on the same page? Threat reporting. Conduct sites visits leading up to the event to understand typical patterns of human movement, who will help public safety officials identify suspicious activity. They want to, being repetitious. How to perceive the psychology of large crowds. government and public officials. Violent extremists may justify or incite violence against targets that represent or are linked to perceived grievances or alleged ideological opponents to foment chaos, fear, or political instability. To better protect to better protect online activity, patterns of life, and personal security settings, they include alter daily routines to avoid surveillance. In other words, do not be repetitious in your mannerisms. If say you're guarding a public official, do not take the same exit. Do not follow a similar pattern. Go out the side door. Go out the front door. If he's going out the side door and he's into a car, go out the back door, go on a bike. Throw the person off. Do not dress him as an official. Avoid posting or publicly sharing details about work-related activities, travel plans, schedules, or locations. Do not go on TikTok. Do not go on Twitter. Do not go on Facebook. And allow for notifications. Allow for your presence to be located on your phone. Do not allow for a GPS tracker to be in line with Twitter or Facebook. Do not announce you're working with any public official, government official, or anybody of this nature. Keep it quiet. Remove badges or other forms of identification when outside of work. Use deception to your advantage toward the enemy. If Donald Trump is going to come in a suit, his crappy hair, he's going to be pretty noticeable. Or if you're a security official working for, say, the Joint Terrorism Task Force or the FBI, don't wear the flak jacket announcing the agency. And that's what this document entails. So, again, remember, Al-Qaeda is not going to basically just come out dressed in the keffiyeh and, dressed in the shawl, wearing a rifle in the back and just, or a martyrdom belt. It's not going to be that easy. They're going to assimilate within, just like the 9/11 hijackers did. And they were successful. Look how successful they were. This time, this is going to employ many more units. If bin Laden, who didn't take over a country, who had to move from different countries, had 19 men, and I think he had more than that, ready to hijack 4 planes and then die for that cause. Well, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani is the president of Syria. He's the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is Al-Qaeda in Syria. He has an entire country. He is the entire military. Al-Qaeda is servicing in the Taliban government in Afghanistan. They have an entire country. They have a formidable fucking military. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula are prominent in North Africa, prominent in Yemen, Sudan, Nigeria, Southern Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, okay? Boko Haram. For God's sakes, they're trying to fight against the rebels and the military in Nigeria. Imagine all of these groups commiserate with one another. How many people do you think would be involved in a terrorist threat like this? Like I said, just use your head. I'm not an expert here. All right? I'm not Sarah Adams. I'm not Bill Roggio. Okay? I don't got intelligence. I'm just using my common sense. Now, of course, some speculation, but I'm careful to say it. All right? But with our foreign policy dictating the motivations for these people to attack, and with our open border policy, and for all these militants to basically have countries behind them, there's going to be far more than fucking 19 men attacking this country. It's either going to be like 300 to 400. But it's not about the attack, the initial attack. It's about how we respond. That's just as important, if not more so. And if it's anything like 9/11, the victims are still going to be us. Because to protect our safety and our security, they'll need to circumvent the very bills and constitutions that they've been trying to circumvent for the last 20 years. And like I said, I think the two areas of concern are going to be immigration and the Second Amendment. That's why I think we'll be at war. All right. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Take